All right, hello everybody, and thanks for watching. There it is, a little glance at the Superlite Coupe chassis. In this video, we are going to mount the upper and lower A-arms for both the front suspension and the rear suspension. We sort of have the A-arms stashed all over the car here. So these are the front uppers. And then in the driver compartment, we've got the rear lowers, the passenger compartment, the front lowers, and then over on the freezer, I sort of call this the work table, but it technically is the freezer. We've got the rear uppers, and these get mounted through these pickup points that we've mounted and adjusted and torqued. And it's a combination of washers and safety washers to set up the camber properly. So I'll show you how you go about mounting these components. I mean, it's early on in the build, so I'm sure these parts may come off, and we'll definitely need adjustment for final alignment. But anyway, you got to get started at some point, so here we go. Okay, well, let's take a look at some of the components that we use to mount the control arms. But first, if you noticed a lot of my shots on the freezer here, there's always a lot of shadows. Well, I have invested heavily in my video equipment, and I've added some backlighting. The best Home Depot has to offer at about $1.99. But anyway, look, I'm trying to make these videos enjoyable without too much hassle, but I do putting them together for everybody. But anyway, these are the washers that we're going to put on the pickup points. So these are the safety washers, and essentially what they do is they go next to all of the heim joints or rod ends, and they give the rod ends enough room to pivot to set the caster and so forth. And then you have the regular steel washers. Normally I would put some anti-seize where these are going to touch the steel, but I think what I'm going to do is once I get everything mounted, I'm not going to tighten them down with the bolts, but then, sort of one set at a time, I'm going to coat all these parts with something called Moly Coat, which is like a graphite-based dry lubricant. And it looks good because it's sort of all aluminum looking, and it should coat everything and keep it all slippery. So I'll show that at a later video, but right now I just want to get everything on the chassis, and then I'll take it apart a little bit at a time and coat these parts with Moly Coat. Okay, we got the lower control arm at least placed, and a couple of things to note. I mean, got these 1/8" steel washers, and actually there's only room for one washer, so I decided to just put it in the front, and the same thing over here. So, this is sort of my thought process, and I'll speak to other folks that have set these cars up before too long, but the idea here is we want to get the suspension on the car, get the wheels on the car, and set it up with 0 toe and 0 camber, and that helps you align the body. So I want to get to that point before I start getting too concerned about, for example, making the spacers here equidistant. I'm setting it up with sort of a default setup that some of the other builders use, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, so not too concerned at this point about figuring out exactly, how many spacers go in front or behind, etc., etc. I don't think it really matters at this point. All right, so the upper rear is mounted at least for now, and a couple observations here. I mean, let's take a look at the spacers. So there's very little movement front to back. You have 2 steel spacers in the front, 1 in the back. So just like the bottom, I sort of biased it by pushing it back a little bit. But then back here, we've got 2 in the back and 1 in the front, but then we still have a lot of room in here. So, look, once I set the suspension, not to put the body on the car and the wheels on the car, then, we'll figure out what we need to do to center those wheels in the body. Let's see, a couple other things. All the default heim joint settings for zero camber, all the heim joints, top and bottom for the rear, are all in, and then the upright, this is 2 full turns out, and that seems to be the formula for zero camber. And the toe is actually controlled by another mechanism. So anyway, I'll mount the other side and then we'll move to the front. All right, well, we got one of the lower A-arms installed that went in quite nicely. Just take a couple peek at the orientation here. So there's no need for spacers. They're built into that lower suspension mounting block. And then in the front here, I'm actually, now I'm happy I bought the thinner washers. You can see there's 2 big washers in the front, a big and a small in the back, and this thing really has very little movement front to back. So as we compress this, it'll tighten this whole assembly up, and I think it'll be fine. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the anti-seize to these lower components, because they're basically tightening up against aluminum, where on top these are cadmium plated steel. So I'll use that moly coat. But down here you've got the bolts tightening up against aluminum and also that aluminum block. So that's what I'll do now, and then I'll do the other side, and then we'll mount the top ones. All right, well, we got the front uppers installed, and a couple comments here. This one's a little different as far as the heim joint setting for zero camber. It's basically 5 out on the upright, and also 5 out towards the chassis. So that's what people use to do zero camber, and then we'll clock them in a little bit to set up the standard camber. Offhand, I don't remember what it is. Let's see, one other comment here. I mean, I did a video on adjusting these brackets so that the bolts would slide in and out, and I thought that was a good idea, but the more I think about it and the more I've been fussing with the washer configuration, I think it would have been better to leave them alone. Because what you see in most of these cases, like I've got a thicker washer and a thinner washer. I actually found some of these in my stock. If these were wider, I could have put the 2 thicker washers and then clamped it together. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do at this point. I'll probably talk to some of the other builders, but at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters. The only thing that matters is how the suspension is aligned, and you could always play with different size washers to get it right. But anyway, it is looking good. It's nice to see some parts on the car. There's the front suspension. We got the rear suspension, so we're getting there. Next up, in the next video, we'll be installing the uprights and setting zero toe. All right, so thanks for watching. Take care. See ya.